Okay, so today I want to talk about workload management. And in particular, I want to focus in on the idea of stress versus time management. So, first of all, I want to let's get this out of the way. We're not talking here about how your university allocates work. Depending where you are in the world, this will be more or less freewheeling. I can only speak for the UK, where most of the universities have some kind of workload allocation module. What happens here is there's a sort of computation about how many hours it takes to do a thing. There's a certain number of hours allocated to each academic, and that's how the amount of tasks that you are given is calculated. However, we all know that that is like playing fantasy football. It is not a real thing. It's a management thing, but it's not a real thing. For example, one might be given 1 hour to prepare a brand new lecture. We all know it takes way more than 1 hour to prepare a lecture. So these numbers are completely meaningless. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about your university workload allocation matrix or whatever you call it. They're not accurate. They're not realistic, because if they were, the university would, your own department would have to hire 50 more people in order to make that actually stack up with the amount of students you have. We know none of that works. This is just a given. I want to get past that in this conversation because you can't change that, right? You can't change that. Trust me, I tried. Sat on a lot of committees in my time about workload allocation models, and it was all for naught, friend. So don't bother. I'm talking about you specifically and how you manage the workload you have been allocated. And in particular, how much mental real estate that you give to various parts of that allocation. I want to think about how you manage and, yes, sometimes bargain, because people do that, so that you optimize your workload into something that won't lead to burnout in you. And you see me emphasizing the word you here a lot because it is different for everybody, because not everybody has the same stress triggers. We all have the same 24 hours, blah, 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 but we don't all react to the same types of work and work allocation in the same way. So I want to get into this a little bit. I talk a lot in my training about time management, although I don't use that phrase because I don't believe in it. But anyway, let's just go with that for now. Time management, because academics that come to me are preoccupied with the fact that they don't have enough time to do their writing. Part of coaching is helping them understand time as a tool and not as a barrier to writing. And so we do a lot of work where we work on their, let's call it, organizational skills. And that frees up a lot of time. When you are more organized, you do have more time available to you to do your writing. But let's just imagine for a second that you actually are a very organized person, okay? So you've already done all of the things that I would teach my clients. So you already have capture systems. You're great at time to task. You have a method for that. You know how to prioritize. You know the difference between urgent and important. You are a ninja at multi-scale planning, right? You've got all of the things. You've got all of the organizational tools and tricks in your arsenal. You're a time management ninja. What then, right? Once you're organized and that has freed up time, but you still feel that writing is a problem. Now you know it's not time though. What else might it be? And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today, because a lot of what I see with my coaching clients is when I've taken away the time crutch, right? When we've gotten rid of that argument because we've created the time, because we've got more organized and everything's working great, but yet still the writing is not free flowing. We have to wonder then what else is going on. And I want you to think about stress, capacity. I'm always talking about capacity in my training, and there's a reason for it. When stress is high, capacity is low. What do I mean by capacity? I mean the ability to bring your whole self and focus deeply on the task at hand, right? If you cannot bring your physical, emotional, and intellectual best self to the writing task, it's going to be hard. You can't do that when you are low on capacity. Some of you might refer to this as bandwidth, but I think that really diminishes what I'm talking about here. So I prefer the word capacity. And one thing that is absolutely guaranteed to diminish your capacity is stress. If your stress levels are high, your capacity to engage in deep work is vastly diminished. What is it that stresses you out at work? I know you're probably thinking, there's a long list. There's a very long list here, but I want you to really do an audit on this and take a pen and paper and really sit down and think deeply about this question. Now, I was listening to a podcast there by Cal Newport, who was talking about the different types of stress that people find themselves under at work. And I'm going to give you his 4 categories now, and then I'm going to add one of my own. The way in which he categorized these 4 different types of stress were as follows. First of all, time stress. Now, I've just blown that out of the water, obviously, but this is how he talks about it. Time stress is an overload of tasks and not enough time to perform them in. Okay, so that's very straightforward. Too much to do. Second type of stress, this was a new one for me, expectation stress. So this is where you feel stressed about having to deliver a very high quality outcome, that is a source of stress for you, whether that's real or perceived, okay? Third, uncertainty and risk. Here he's talking about the stress of the possibility that bad things might happen if I do X or if I don't do X, right? So classically, my clients, this presents as bad things might happen if I set a boundary, if I don't do something that I've been asked to do, or if you're not sure of the next steps. So let's imagine you have been allocated a role, but you don't know how to perform that role because nobody has told you. There's been no handover. It's a new role. It's a made up role. Anything can happen in academia. And the uncertainty around the 4 corners of what is expected of you is creating an immense amount of internal stress. The 4th thing he said was conflict. So conflict, whether this is in the form of toxic workplaces or toxic colleagues or individuals, or even toxic systems that encourage conflict and bad feeling, right? So depending on what kind of work environment you're in, obviously he's not just talking about universities here. So conflict is the 4th thing. Now, I have added another one to that because I'm not immune to stress. I have had plenty of academic stress in my life, but I didn't think anything on the list quite captured what stresses me out. So the 5th one I'm going to put in there is control. And what I mean by this is not about like what tasks you were given, but how you are executing them, right? So agency, if you like, in academic parlance, that's what I'm talking about. So I'm not necessarily talking about autonomy, I'm talking about agency. I don't necessarily want to decide exactly what is given to me, but I want to decide how I'm going to do it. All right. They're the 5 factors I want you to think about. And if you can think of something I haven't captured, by all means, A, let me know, and B, write that down on your list. And I'm going to talk about these a little bit and give you some examples so we can put some meat on these bones. Okay. The reason I'm going through this is because there's this idea, I think, if you're having trouble with writing, that if only I had less things to do, fewer tasks, that it would all be okay. But I can tell you time and time and time again, I see this. It's not okay. If it's, and it reveals itself quite quickly that it wasn't never ever the number of tasks. I mean, very occasionally it is the number of tasks that somebody has to perform. That's because they have boundary issues and they've said yes to everything under the sun, and now they just can't possibly, and nobody could possibly, perform the amount of tasks that they have taken on voluntarily. That is a task problem, and you have to let go of some. I mean, the solution there is quite simple to build capacity. But I see individuals and institutions make this mistake over again, concentrating on how many tasks a person is allocated. For example, if somebody is signed off with burnout, and they come back and they're on a staged return, usually the classic response is to reduce the number of tasks that they have to perform. And of course, if that was the reason that they went off sick, great, that works. But a lot of the time, that was never the problem. The person might even have thought that was the problem. I have too many things to do. I just can't cope. It's all getting too much. And they think that if they had less to do, that would solve the problem. And it often doesn't, right? That's actually not the reality. So we need to think about what is causing the stress rather than how many things you have to do in your academic job. So if I give you some concrete examples here, when I was a very young academic, I could see certain people in my department gaming the workload allocation system. And the way to do this there were many ways. Okay, so many ways to game the system, but let's just give you one example. The best academic life, as in the most free time, belonged to the people who did the following. They taught across many modules. So let's say the standard module allocation was two undergraduate courses and a master's course. Let's say it was that. Okay. These people would teach across 4 modules. So it looks like they've an enormous amount of tasks to do because they're spread thin, but they're not in charge of anything. So they're not module leading. They're not writing the exams. They're not delivering most of the content. They're only turning up to do tutorials like a teaching robot across a wide variety of topics, but they're not actually doing anything else. They're standing up in the classroom, but that's it. And because they're across so many modules, the multipliers in the matrix mean that they're given few repeats of that module, and therefore they have less grading. They have no responsibility. They have no conflict. It seems like they have a lot of tasks, but they actually don't. They're actually escaping the task accumulation roles. So that was the classic way to game the system. The other way is to take on a master's module, which would bring an enormous amount of hours and credits, massively weighted in comparison to an undergraduate module, and then make it so unpopular nobody rolls on it, but you've already been credited with the credits. I mean, that, people did that all the time. So there's ways to game that system. And for those people, because obviously the kind of thing that stressed them out was conflict, responsibility, task accumulation, whatever it was. They were avoiding that by having that particular life. It leaves you with very little control. You're not in charge of anything. But if that's not your stressor, it's all gravy, right? So there's very little risk. There's low expectations, there's low conflicts, and there's actually fewer tasks if you go down that route. Well, particularly within my university anyway. Your mental real estate is preserved. You have a lot of capacity, basically. Now, that's my idea of hell, okay? But for some people, that's optimally low stress and high capacity. Now, personally, that would drive me nuts because I think, as I've indicated already, I would rather have more work, more tasks to perform, more responsibility, high expectations. I don't mind the conflict, but not being in control of how things are done is my major stressor. So I'm not a person, if you're a module leader, you have to allocate work. That comes with conflict. I don't mind. I don't mind being the decision maker. I don't mind the high expectations and accountability. No problem. I can tolerate risk well. So if I get things wrong, it's all on me. It's my responsibility. No problem. I'm a time management ninja, so I'm super efficient. So task overload is therefore not going to stress me out. I'm a very organized person. But if I lack control over my work and schedule, right, because I'm working with people who are chaotic, they are, Barbara is my course leader and she's a chaos monster. And I am on my last nerve in 3 minutes flat, right? I cannot bear working with Barbara. I will take on more work to avoid her because I know Barbara reduces my capacity. She stresses me out. Her last minute bullshit, telling everybody what the lecture schedule is at the last minute, not having the tutorial sheets ready, that is going to make my hair fall out. So I will do anything to avoid working with her, right? I'll take on more tasks. I'll have more work, but I'll have less Barbara. I understand where my stressor lies, right? So if I had gone off with stress, for example, and my recovery plan, my back to work plan, and they were like, we're just going to take all your roles away. We're going to take all the work away. You're just on this one course. And guess what? Barbara's leading that course. I am straight back off on stress leave because it was never the amount of work. It was Barbara. And by the way, it's not because I'm afraid of conflict with Barbara. I can have a shouting match all day long with Barbara. That's not the problem. Problem is, it doesn't make any difference to Barbara. She's still going to be chaotic because that's her nature. Right? So, know thyself, writer. This is what I'm talking about here. Get to know yourself and understand what is it that is the thing that reduces my capacity and what can I do to avoid that thing? Because you will be amazed how much focus and deliberative writing practice you can do when that capacity drainer is removed from your life. It's not necessarily the accumulation of all you have to do. It is having the thing that stresses you out. That is the important thing to identify. So the homework for today is I want you to do an audit about what really pushes your buttons in the workplace. Because if it's that you just cannot stand one more minute with Barbara, take evasive action. Take on another course. Make a bargain with your head of school. Do whatever you need to do to get the hell away from Barbara. Bargain your way out of those stress triggers. If you, for example, have been allocated a role and they haven't told you what to do and it's really stressing you out, and that's very common in academia. Here's a title, your tasks, they're never defined. Just make it up as you go along. That for some people is incredibly stressful. If uncertainty feels like you are doomed to fail because you can't know what you're meant to be doing, and therefore you can't meet the high expectations you're setting for yourself, then get out of that role, okay? This uncertainty will cause some people to allocate a lot of mental real estate to unsolvable problems. This is not a problem you can solve by applying your vast intellect. Fake roles with titles that don't really do anything are not problems you need to resolve, okay? They're not, you know? If you have a role with no defined tasks, don't do anything. If you're not comfortable with that, switch roles. I don't care what you have to say, but there's no point in devoting all that mental real estate to an unsolvable problem. It's very important to do this work for yourself, because conflating stresses is one of the reasons people burn out. It's also one of the reasons, even when time appears for people to do their writing, they can't focus because they still have this unresolved stressor going on that's diminishing their capacity. Right? So my problem with Barbara is not that I'm afraid of the conflict with Barbara. I can shout at Barbara all day. But that won't change Barbara because she's going to Barbara all day long, right? So there's no point in shouting at Barbara because it's not going to change anything. That's not my issue. My issue is the uncertainty, the lack of organization, the last minute requests, the student unhappiness caused by Barbara's chaos that ends up in my inbox that I then feel I have to resolve. That's what I can't deal with. It's not Barbara, right? It's the result of Barbara's chaos. Now, because in this scenario, Barbara isn't a toxic person, right? She's not out to get you. She's not bullying. She's just chaotic, and that other people, no problem to them, right? That's just the thing that pushes my particular button, right? So it's not about Barbara being toxic. It's just me and Barbara, we're not a good match, right? Chaos meets control freak, not good, stresses you out. Of course, sometimes there is a toxic coworker that you do have to avoid, because it gets on you like radiation, and you don't want to get any of that on you. So you just need to give them a wide berth. Again, bargain your way out. You'd be amazed the bargains you can strike in order to curate your working environment where you minimize the stresses. It's not about minimizing work. I mean, this is a real life story with Barbara. Obviously, names have changed to protect the innocent or guilty. But I had to take on an entirely new course midway through a semester to get rid of Barbara from my life. But I did it, and it was fine because I was in control of that module. So, this is what I mean. I didn't have fewer tasks. It wasn't about minimum. I had more tasks, in fact, many more tasks. But that sat much better with me than having to exist in this maelstrom of chaos that I just could not operate in. You'd be surprised how easy it is to bargain your way out of the toxicity. You just need to be creative. When these stresses are gone, you will be amazed how much capacity appears. So even if you only then had 30 minutes to do your writing, what you get done in that 30 minutes far outstrips the 3 hours of writing with Barbara in your life, because your capacity within that 3 hours is gone because you're too busy stressing out all the time. So what we're going for here is high capacity mental real estate that is spacious, capacious, untroubled. When you have that and you can bring your whole self to that writing practice, you will be amazed how much more productive you are in a very small amount of time. because you're bringing your whole concentration to it. I mean, it's one of the reasons, of course, why we don't open email before we've done our writing, because that's the whole river of Barbaras at you. And we don't want that. If it is task overload, then you do need to get rid of some tasks, right? You do need to get rid of some things, but only you can know that. And this is why I'm saying this is a very personal reflection. And a lot of times clients will come to a coach and they'll tell me, right? They'll tell me it's task overload and they'll start listing all of the things. And I'll be like, oh, yeah, you do seem to have a lot to do. But actually, when I get to know them over a period of weeks and months, I realize in conversation, the same thing comes up over and over and over. And compared to the amount of things they have to do, it's a minuscule percentage of that. And yet this is the thing that is diminishing their capacity, yet they are convinced it's the amount of things they have to do. So you need to sit and have a serious reflection and try to work out, it can also be both, by the way. Like, you can have too many things to do. You could reduce that. And you have other things that are stressing you out. But I really want you to be disciplined here and don't fall into the trap of, I've just too many things to do. I want you to think deeper. What is it about the things that you have to do that is stressing you out? Because what I want you to be able to do is choose wisely and deploy your mental real estate judiciously.